interested to know whether you've experienced summits like this. Both of you, but I'll start with you, Alexander.
Well, when I was the foreign minister, I frequently went to summits of one kind or another, COP included. And obviously you use those summit meetings as an opportunity to meet with your counterparts from a range of countries that are important to you and to have discussions with them about any manner of issues. You're not just going to sit in the conference hall listening to a series of prepared speeches.
So this is why we've heard from Christopher Hope, our political editor, that Rishi Sunak has been having meetings with the Rwandan president and then also King Abdullah of Jordan. He'll be having all of these side discussions at the same time as also appearing on the international stage to talk about climate change.
Yeah, so it makes perfect sense. He wants to speak to King Abdullah about the Hamas attack on the Israelis and Jewish people. He wants to talk to President Kagame about the renegotiation of the treaty with Rwanda. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Ivor, I suppose it's not a surprise, and potentially it makes the argument for going to these summits not so much to talk about climate change, but to talk about everything else.
Well, I think any of these conferences, it's what goes on the side is much more important in terms of political or politics, is what in how that works. Because once you've got the politics going, you can then deal with the other matters. And you've got people there, like, of course, the King's speech this morning, like secretaries of state and shadow secretaries of state, who can all do the stuff required for COP28. But for the Prime Minister, for the Leader of the Opposition, and for many other people, it's what goes on around the edge that is going to be the most important thing. And we've certainly, I think, both been in that situation.
Realistically, is there much more that the United Kingdom can do when it comes to climate? We've halved our emissions, we've got all of these targets, all of these new carbon budgets that the government passes all the time, and ultimately have committed to net zero by 2050. I mean, it's a game of catch-up for the rest of the world.
I think, Tom, you have to be realistic here. I don't think we can do much more, but we should just carry on doing what we tried to do. And, of course, we want to also help, if we can, with other countries. But, of course, you know, where Britain is at the moment, it's been quite difficult. You just have to think of Greece. Difficult for Britain to work even with, you know, one or two countries. But we should be doing a lot more of that.
Well, that leads me on to one of the key pillars of our climate policy, Alexander, is to influence other nations. Influence other nations to reduce their carbon emissions, and that is why it's not so just important for us to reduce our own carbon emissions, but the idea is that by going to summits like this, we can persuade the likes of India, China and other nations to reduce their emissions.
Australia,
perhaps. Do you think there's something in that?
We're making a huge contribution.
Do you think Rishi Sunak standing up, as he will, to tell the world that this is a critical moment, has an influence on other nations? Or do you think they think,
they're all hearing the same message, that they should do something about reducing their CO2 emissions, so whether he says so or not isn't going to make any difference, but he should say so. The second thing is that what is interesting about the British government is it's coming to terms with reality. So it's one thing to reduce your emissions, but don't forget the punters, don't forget the public. Don't be pushing up their energy prices every year and impoverishing particularly low-income people with your zeal for changing the weather. So you've got to get the balance right. And I thought, listening to Claire Coutinho, the new Energy Secretary, she has brought a measure of common sense to this debate. And I think if Britain can contribute anything, it is common sense that, yes, it's fine to address the issue of climate change and do our best, particularly to invest in new technologies and adaptation to climate change, but we don't want to do so at the expense of wrecking the living standards of particularly low and middle income people.
Now, you both have been ministers of the Crown. You both have served...
the same crown.
Different countries,
same crown.
Different countries, same crown. And kicking off today at COP was a remarkable speech by the King. Seems like the only head of state who's giving that sort of big speech at COP. Is he wading too much into the politics of climate change, Ivan?
It's a very, very delicate area, and we all know that. And of course, Her Majesty the Queen never ever went anywhere near any of those issues that you're raising there. I didn't hear it all this morning because I had to find a train to make sure could get me here today. So that was a bit disappointing for me not to have heard it all. But having read back some of it, I think he's really coming back to where he was as the Prince of Wales and laying back out to worldwide audience that this is what I believe in and this is what I hope we can all take forward together. I saw him use that particular phrase in the speech. I think that's a reasonable position for the King of the United Kingdom.
It was quite fearful.
And for the Commonwealth, sorry, I was just going to say, and for the Commonwealth.
It was quite fearful, some of what we heard from the King. He talked about how we're carrying out a vast, frightening experiment of changing every ecological condition all at once at a pace that far outstrips nature's ability to cope. And he talked about how we're imperiling our survivability with regards to climate change.
I mean, this is what
Do you
he
think
said.
that's too much?
This is what he said over the years. That's the point.
Right, this is what he's said over the years. I think as the King, and he is the head of state, yes, I think what we would politely agree here is that he should be very careful. I have to say, it's all very well for a billionaire king to talk about the dangers of climate change and the ecology and so on, but it is important to think about ordinary people and about the cost of living impact of some of these policies. So I would rather the King struck more of a balance in his remarks and showed empathy for the people who are going to have to pay for higher energy costs. I know the line of climate change zealots is that you build a whole lot of wind farms, suddenly energy is going to be much cheaper. To use the phrase they love, lived experience is that is totally untrue.
You're true.
Because it's your true. Because it's not consistent energy.
One form of energy that is consistent is nuclear power, and I find it fascinating that whenever we talk to climate activists, we had one on the programme yesterday who seemed incredibly passionate about getting CO2 down, but then you look at what these people say in the past, and they've been ferociously campaigning against one of the main ways that we could get to net zero, i.e. nuclear power.
So frustrating.
Ivor, you were part of a government that didn't build any nuclear power stations.
True.
And indeed, the last 13 years, we have not completed any new nuclear power stations. I was looking recently, the last nuclear power station to be fully built in the United Kingdom was approved by Margaret Thatcher in 1988. This is a cross-party failure, is it not?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think there's no doubt that there are areas that if we were given the chance again, which we may be, we don't know, but if we were, there are areas of policy that need to be properly dealt with by a Labour government. And that didn't happen. And I think after that, for the Conservatives, obviously the first 5 years was apparently with the Liberal Democrats as well. It never worked, you know, in terms of what you need to do as a government. And I certainly think on nuclear power, tend to absolutely agree with you, and on housing, you know, these are two areas where a government should be able to get this right and deal with it as a cross-party area of policy for the UK, because otherwise we're never going to get any way forward on this.
And just so unfortunately, we're always agreeing with each other, but just so the viewers understand this, as they're thinking how they love wind power and solar power, you know, there's a great saying in Australia, you're not going to have solar energy overnight. It's a great line, that.
Very good.
Wind power is intermittent, obviously, as well. So you have to have backup sustainable power. And if you're not going to use coal-fired power stations or gas, you're going to have to use nuclear. And it is expensive, but I think we need to invest much more heavily in nuclear power.
On that point, of course, nuclear power stations do take a while, do take quite a lot of years in this country in particular to actually build. But it's interesting you talk about renewables not generating enough power, the power that we need, because the chief executive, the chief executive of National Gas has actually been speaking today, or it's in the papers today anyway, saying that because of this cold snap, we've maxed out our gas power. So we could be facing quite a lot of difficulties, and he points to the fact that the renewables aren't there because they're intermittent.
So
they can't give us that base
we're
load.
worried about climate change, but it's incredibly cold, and we haven't got enough gas, and we want to get rid of fossil fuels.
I don't think climate change only
Did any
means it gets
viewers
hotter.
think that common sense just doesn't seem to come into play?
I'm sure you're not suggesting that just because it's getting cold in the winter that it doesn't also get much hotter in the summer. I think what climate scientists might argue...
It's interesting that COP28 is now during this cold snap.
I'm just talking about now.
That's true, that's true. It's funny, though. I think if people really wanted to get global agreements and encourage some countries to make sure that we get these global agreements and commit to what the UK has agreed to, maybe they should hold the summit in Dubai, but without any air conditioning. That might get them to sign it rather quicker.
I'm not sure that's a very good idea.
It would be, by the way, it would be OK at this time of year.
Yeah,
but if you had it in the summer and it's 45 degrees, that might get
I have
them
to say, I spent 2 weeks in Glasgow when we held COP26 2 years ago, and it was freezing. And I just thought, this is not going to encourage anyone to have any sense of urgency about a heating up planet. It was quite funny to see all the generators around the outside of these tents that were constructed as well to make sure that everyone was toasty and warm inside.
Can we get your view on the ongoing saga that is the Rwanda plan?
Of course, the Prime Minister met with President Kigali just earlier today. But Emily, what was it that the government was saying?
They were saying that essentially Rishi Sunak has come out to say that it's essentially still a goer, and that in the long run it will save the taxpayer billions and billions of pounds having this kind of deportation scheme in place. They're working on a new treaty with Rwanda in the hopes that that will be able to pass the legal tests that has so far blighted this project. Alexander, of course, Australia has had its own problems with small boats and illegal migration. Do you think our government is going to manage to get to grips with this?
Well, they need to get to grips with the legal problems, which they obviously haven't done so far. So I couldn't comment on whether they're going to solve those legal problems, but they need to do it quickly. If they can make the Rwanda scheme work, it will be very effective because it'll destroy the business model of the organised crime gangs, which are bringing people across on these dangerous journeys on small boats. We certainly found that in Australia with Nauru, a much less desirable place than Rwanda, I might say. By having the processing done in Nauru, then they stopped coming. So, you know, if 40,000...
So why was your country able to do it and not...
Well,
Britain
is not able to do it because of the legal problems that they've had. And to be honest, the government didn't anticipate the legal problems well enough, and they could have legislated. They didn't legislate. The treaty needs to be redone with Rwanda. Well, once all that's done, maybe it will work legally.
I'm sure that last week, I'm sure someone said that they had an agreement on the treaty. Well, that turns out not to be the case. And that's where I think the whole legal side then starts to fall over for the whole issue. I don't see this happening. And if it does happen, the number of people who you will land up taking to Rwanda is going to be very small compared to the number of people who have been able to get into the UK for whatever reason. You know, I mean, it will be in hundreds.
So it's not going to save us billions.
By the way, I can speak from experience here in Australia. You don't need to send huge numbers of people there. 40,000 came last year on small boats into the UK. You wouldn't need to send 40,000 people to Rwanda.
Right.
You just need to start sending people to Rwanda, and then potential asylum seekers won't pay the people smugglers to come to the UK because they'll think we will end up in Rwanda.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They'll rather stay in France. I mean, the choice is France or Rwanda.
That being said, the government always says, oh, no one wants to go to Rwanda, it's a deterrent. And then with the other half of their mouth, they say, isn't Rwanda lovely? The fastest growing country in Africa. The facilities are wonderful.
All of the above.
It's a mixed message.
It is a lovely country.
You definitely can't say that.
I've been to Rwanda twice, and it's a beautiful country.
So therefore, perhaps not the same deterrent effect that the Australian system
compared to France, right? Well, would you rather live in Rwanda or France?
Depends
I mean,
if
that
Paris
is the
on
choice.
fire or not, I suppose.
Depends what region. Depends what region. Well, I'm disappointed. That's all we've got time for with you two. Thank you very much for your time.
Sorry, we agreed with each other.
Not on everything. Not on
It's
everything.
wonderful. It's like a grand coalition, one of these German governments that we often see.
That was former Labour MP and Minister
that would be
Ivan
good.
Kaplan, and of course former Australian Foreign Minister Alexander Downer.